Douglas Roche, Webster.
McCain's. And remember those beautiful food baskets, great for Christmas giving.
Woodward's has it all. SATV, we're coming through for you.
Good morning. There is no doubt about it that one of the most impressive headline makers in our House of Commons is the young man Svend Robinson, NDP MP for Burnaby. Every now and again he gets in a spot of problem. Recently he had to regret his action in naming two Petrocan officials apparently involved, according to his statement made under immunity in the House of Commons, in some activity questionable about American inquiries into Canadian economic operations. Mr. Robinson has regretted this publicly, and I still don't understand why, because parliamentary immunity is there for people like Robinson to use names in the House of Commons in circumstances in which they cannot be used outside the House of Commons. We'll find out from Mr. Robinson this morning precisely why he regrets it, and two, what was this CIA document of key intelligence questions, and what did the Americans want to find out about Canada's economic intelligence? That's point number one. Point number two this morning should be quite exciting. When Madam Justice Proudfoot brought down her ruling that Bruce Yorke's election to the 10th spot in Vancouver City Council was invalid, causing another by-election, she put the political control of Vancouver City Council right on the balance. It's now dead even between the forces of the right, the non-partisan association, and the forces of the left, the Harcourt Cope coalition. Is this going to be a full-scale campaign? So we have here this morning Bruce Yorke, unhappily for him, ex-alderman, a recent winner. And we also have Philip Owen, the man just behind him, who wants that seat and now has a chance to win it in a by-election. On top of that, we have the first appearance on the Webster program since the election of the Mulroney government of any official of the Mulroney government. Doug Roche, an ex-Tory MP for Edmonton South, who is Canada's new Disarmament Commissioner, and perhaps he'll tell us why Canada voted against the UN resolution for a nuclear freeze. And purely by happenstance, not a sandbagging operation in any way, shape or form, in the studio today is the intrepid Pauline Jewett, who may or may not disagree with our ambassador's position on certain important foreign affairs matters. But first and off the top, none other than our Svend after the break.
Made a mistake now, like most of us do once or twice in our lives, at least, and he has publicly apologized. What more can you expect?
It is a centuries-old tradition that the floor of the Houses of Commons in the Commonwealth give an elected member total immunity. He can say things there for which he cannot be sued by anyone. And we in the press, and therefore the public, if we report these things accurately, we cannot be sued either. Svend Robinson, Justice Critic of the NDP, under the Solicitor General's Department too, dropped a bombshell the other day. Without mentioning the names, what was the bombshell you dropped?
What I said, Jack, was that the CIA had apparently targeted Canada for economic intelligence purposes in the mid-1970s. They'd targeted a number of crown corporations, they'd targeted the government of Saskatchewan, and I released a document, which, confidential document, which the authenticity of which has been confirmed by the American Embassy since then. And I also said in the committee, in the Justice Committee, that 2 individuals had been effectively tasked by the CIA to assist in obtaining information with respect to the operations of Petro-Canada.
Now, we've agreed not to use the names this morning because of, although we could, but because of your regret that you did this in a certain manner. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
But you were saying that here are 2 senior officials, one still with the Petro-Can and one with the other, who had, as you've been saying, given tasks to perhaps to supply the information to key economic questions about Canada for the United States.
That's the essence of it, yes, Chairman.
I must ask you this question. The names as such were not in the document to which you were referring.
Names weren't in the document. The references to Petro-Canada and the role that Petro-Canada was playing, for example, with respect to American acquisitions, was certainly in the document.
We'll come to that in a moment. Having done that, and having said that, first thing was that Mr. Broadbent said that you had told him you regretted it. Did you break a rule of the Gentleman's Club?
No, it goes beyond any kind of rule of the Gentleman's Club. As a member of Parliament, I have what's called parliamentary immunity. It's a very, very powerful weapon in the hands of a member of Parliament.
Must be used with discretion.
Must be used with extreme discretion. And in retrospect, I thought about it a great deal, and in retrospect, I felt that what I should have done in the circumstances was to have given the evidence which I had to the Solicitor General and asked him to make the necessary inquiries without having named the 2 individuals. I was reminded, and I think reminded appropriately, that in another era, that another elected representative in the United States of America had, under the cloak of his parliamentary immunity, his legislative immunity, made some very damning accusations with respect to individuals who had no opportunity effectively to reply. So I did not want to set a precedent, if you would, in naming these individuals, even though certainly, as you've said, this is a tradition which is a historic tradition, and I might say an important tradition.
Yeah, in other words, just to clarify it for people who might not be old enough, the Joe McCarthy atmosphere was not going to be recreated by you.
Certainly not.
But there's still, in another occasion in the future, speaking, hypothetically, there could well be situations where a member of the Parliament must, without consulting the government, name an individual if he is sure that he is being responsible and within the limits of reasonable accuracy, name that person in the House for the good of the country. Is that not correct?
I think that's correct.
I'm talking separately apart from these 2 altogether.
It should be done rarely, but I think that we are elected as representatives of the people of this country to make sure that we do exercise that oversight. And in some cases as well, the effect of that immunity is that we will not be required to disclose the sources of our information in any forum. And as a journalist, you can appreciate the significance of that.
Had you gone to McKay with your information, you could have waited, given him notice, you might say, waited for him to respond, but then you would never have had back.
That's possible, but I think that the key issue in this question is exactly what was the CIA doing in Canada in the mid-1970s under George Bush as the director, and frankly, what is the CIA doing in Canada today under George Bush as vice president and William Casey as director?
Well, would I be too cynical, perhaps too old, if I said, well, what the hell do you expect? The CIA, the Americans and the CIA are obviously going to be spying in Canada to protect their national interests, especially if they have a government up in Canada, which, like the Liberals, was kicking foreign oil companies out of the land.
I think that would be a bit cynical. I think that Alan Blakeney, for example, was right when he said that we as Canadians should be concerned about our economic sovereignty and that friends of ours should not be in a position of effectively spying on us, using covert activity to obtain information which is of assistance to them economically.
Let's go to the KIQs. Key Intelligence Questions, Confidential, Economic Alert List, Western Europe, prepared by the Economic Intelligence Committee. Is that part of the CIA?
The questions were issued by the director of the CIA, by George Bush.
Right. He is now vice president.
That's correct, yes.
Let's go to some of the key questions which you regard as an invasion of our sovereignty. Do you?
Yeah, I certainly do, yes.
What are they?
Okay, let's go to the last question. There's a series of 10 priorities. And what Bush is saying as director of the CIA is to the intelligence community, and that's the CIA, the National Security Agency, is get me this information. Now the question is, how did they obtain the information? Look at the question here about Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan has not yet acted to nationalize selected companies in the potash industry, but a move in this direction is expected. Now here's the kind of information that they're asking for, Jack. Report actions taken by the provincial government, that was the NDP Blakeney government, industry positions, and Ottawa's position. Provide details of negotiations for compensation.
They could report what these people have done publicly, but to provide details of negotiations means spying.
That's right. You don't read that in the newspaper. Report any financing arrangements being considered by the province for compensation.
That means intelligence surveillance of some kind.
Exactly.
More of the key intelligence questions with Svend Robinson on the issue of CIA activities in Canada after the break. I suppose, Sven, before we get back to the key intelligence questions, that the situation you're in now is not guilty, but don't do it again. Eh?
That's probably fair. I won't be naming names again.
Unless you have to in some other disassociated matter in the public interest down the line somewhere.
But I certainly intend to pursue this particular question.
Right. Well, let's pursue a little bit more of these key intelligence questions. As I say, one is not the least bit surprised about the CIA or the Americans wanting to know what we're doing. Let's go to, which one? Let's go to Petrocan. What did they want to be spied about for Petrocan?
Okay, what the director of the CIA said to the intelligence community was, look, Petrocan is, he explained that Petrocan was Canada's national oil company. He said that they may be wanting to nationalize, to purchase the domestic assets of a U.S.-owned oil company, Atlantic Richfield Oil Company. Find out what you can find out about that potential acquisition.
Or any other oil company, and if so, which company?
Exactly. Now, that's not the kind of information, again, that is publicly available. He talks, for example, about finding out, reporting is desired on any role Petrocan may play in Vietnam. Well, I think Canadians have a right to know just exactly what the CIA was up to in this country. Why were they spying on an ally and a friend? And if so, what techniques were they using and who were they using?
Okay, we've covered that. Dome. Have we covered Dome Petroleum?
Dome Petroleum, no, that was another one that they were interested in. They indicated that Dome Petroleum was going to be doing some drilling, likely in the Beaufort Sea. And the head of the CIA says to the American intelligence community, if Dome gets federal approval for its program, reporting is also desired on drilling progress. Well,
all right.
Drilling progress is one of the most closely guarded secrets of
Have a look at how much oil, what prospects they have of getting big supplies of oil out of the Arctic under C4. Next question, though. Are you now up against a dead end on this? I haven't seen much of the key intelligence questions reported anywhere in the country. They're all more interested in the embarrassment of Svend Robinson, aren't they?
Well, that's been one of my concerns, is that the substance of this issue, which is a very serious issue about the extent to which the CIA was in fact targeting Canada for economic intelligence purposes, that's been lost in the other story. I certainly intend to pursue this matter.
How can you pursue the matter? You can't go to the CIA and say, did you do this, did you do that?
No, I can't do that, but fortunately there are two committees in the United States that have the specific responsibility for oversight of the operations of the CIA. There's a Senate committee and a committee of the House of Representatives. You might recall that was the committee that just criticized Casey, the director of the CIA.
Oh, for the guerrilla handbook.
For the guerrilla handbook. That was the committee that criticized the CIA for mining the harbors in Nicaragua. So the Americans do, to their credit, have committees made up of elected representatives to make sure that the CIA has been operating properly. What I have done is I've written to the directors of both those committees, the heads of both those committees, Senator Barry Goldwater in the Senate and Congressman Boland in the House, and I've said, here's what's been happening in Canada. This is what the CIA was asked to do. Now I want you to investigate and find out exactly what they did do. To what extent did they use secret covert techniques.
Well, is there any indication that they will support you at this kind of probe? They objected in Nicaragua, perhaps they might object in Canada.
That's quite possible. I'm hoping, in fact, to visit Washington, D.C. and to meet with the individuals involved early in the new year.
It's a silly question, but you won't have any trouble crossing the border, will you?
Well, I'm sure the CIA would vouch for me.
Mind you, you are a socialist from Canada. I'm not talking about crossing the border. And I mean, people like Goldwater ain't all that interested in being seen cozying up to Svend Robinson or any other socialist from Canada.
I think that the oversight committees in the United States have played a very valuable role in the past in making sure that the CIA has been operating properly, and I hope that they'll do that in this case.
Okay, we've got a couple of minutes. What about this Mulroney government? What about this nonsense that nobody can find out what happened to Petrocan or Petrofina deal? Do you accept that as valid?
Well, I remember so well Brian Mulroney in the middle of the election campaign saying, you know, it's disgraceful that Pierre Trudeau won't tell the people of Canada what's going on. Let's open up the books. He gets into government, and what does he do? He said, I had no option. I had no option. You know, now who else said I had no option?
Wonder how many Tory patronage appointments have been made up to now? Only 30 or 40, isn't it?
There have been, we've just seen the tip of the iceberg.
But sure outsmarted you by appointing Stephen Lewis, didn't he?
I think that
the NDP.
I think that Stephen Lewis's appointment was an excellent appointment.
But it got the heat off, didn't it?
What it did is send out an early signal. I think it was a smoke signal. I think it was a ruse, but it sent out an early signal suggesting that there was a change. But all indications with the recent appointments are that it's more of the same. It's the same old bunch.
No doubt in my mind whatsoever on that particular subject. Thank God for Kenneth Dye.
Indeed. He's done a terrific job on the Petrofina deal, Jack.
Svend Robinson, NDP MP for Burnaby North. Go forth and don't do it again, unless you really have to.
Thank you, Jack.
My thanks to Svend Robinson. Next, Doug Roche, former Tory MP for Edmonton South, who's Canada's Disarmament Ambassador. After the break. Sometimes my jokes go awry, A-W-R-Y. Well, let me try this one on. Doug Roche is Canada's new Disarmament Ambassador. Mr. Roche, I can call you Doug. We've known each other for years.
Absolutely.
You're not allowed to talk to me socially because of Joe's gag order.
How would you like to go out for a drink after the show?
You're breaking the rule.
Doesn't apply to me.
Doesn't apply to you. Good. Now, as the new Disarmament Ambassador, you're taking a fair amount of heat because the other day, acting for Canada, you voted against the UN resolution for a nuclear freeze at a time when I think half a dozen of the NATO nations either abstained or voted against it. Why didn't we have guts enough to vote at least once for the nuclear freeze resolution?
First of all, it would break the policy of the Canadian government. The new Canadian government has not yet had an opportunity of examining all the structural implications of a change in our vote on the freeze. As you know, Jack, there's going to be a full foreign policy review starting in 1985, a parliamentary review. It'll be public, with public participation. Many of the hearings will be on television. We want the Canadian people to speak in that parliamentary review. Secondly, the government a few months ago set up the new Institute for International Peace and Security. That'll be a major resource center for gathering of information in a way that the government can be advised on the objective facts of the arms race. I think that it would have been quite unusual for the government of Canada, upon assuming office, to change the structure of a policy without any kind of full review that I've been referring to.
You're telling me that we, under the new, brand new, virginal Tory government, are stuck with the Liberal policies until next year sometime, when you finally, having been in office for a year, make your review complete on foreign policy.
It's not so much being stuck with the Liberal policies, it's carrying out all the implications of our relationship with NATO, our relationship with the United States. It is not a responsible act for any government to change foreign policy overnight in an abrupt way without full consideration. And I'm saying to you that the short time that elapsed between the Mulroney government taking office and that vote in the UN was simply insufficient for a full examination to have taken place.
Except, presumably, Canada consulted with its allies, and of the 15, 6 did not vote for that resolution. But what difference would it have made if Canada had said, well, this time we're going to go for a nuclear freeze?
Don't forget, these are not the 6 of the key countries of NATO. They're not part of the nuclear planning group. They're not our economic partners. The major NATO countries did vote against the 3 freeze resolutions, each one of which was deficient in its own right.
Let me put another thing to you, Mr. Ambassador. You were accused in the Winnipeg Free Press of Thursday, December the 6th. Rather than betray your conscience, why don't you resign? Shouted one member of the audience, referring to the fact that you signed a committee minority report with others advocating a nuclear freeze and a ban on cruise missile testing, among other things. Now, you did.
Well, I think that what the person who was in the audience simply lost track of the fact that the government appointed me Ambassador for Disarmament precisely because I did support the minority report of a couple of years ago, because I have had an involvement in these issues, and because the government has made me an advisor as well as an ambassador. I think we should remember that the government of Canada is engaged in several areas of arms control and disarmament. We have done a lot at the United Nations this fall on work of outer space, on a comprehensive test ban, on chemical weapons. Those are real, substantial steps that I'm afraid some people lose sight of as they wish to end the arms race by merely proclaiming a freeze. That won't end the arms race.
No, but what you're telling me is that at least in your appointment we can be assured that one of the reasons, perhaps, for your appointment was that you're a guy who is for a nuclear freeze and against cruise missile testing as an individual.
My track record has been pretty well known in the country, and I think that the government has got in place a number of people, including Ambassador Stephen Lewis at the United Nations, who bring to these jobs some involvement in the past, some knowledge, and an opportunity to influence government policy.
And yet you voted, you know, back to nuclear freeze. You voted for that nuclear winter resolution. Canada did. Nuclear war, even on a limited scale, will produce smoke, soot and dust to trigger an Arctic nuclear winter, transform the Earth into Helen Caldicott's frozen planet.
Well, I pay my respects to Helen Caldicott. She's been among those leaders in the world who have helped to influence public opinion on the realities of nuclear war. Canada voted for the nuclear winter study at the United Nations, and I'm very glad that we did, because we helped to lead the way in bringing into the UN nuclear winter studies that will help to educate people as to the full realities of what the nuclear pileup really means in the world.
Do you think, as our disarmament ambassador, that we should be sending beat-up old CF-104s fully repaired to Turkey?
Look, my position is, Jack, I'm against every weapon in the world, but I have to have some priorities, and my priorities are to work on the nuclear question because of the outstanding fact of the damage that it will do to vast sections of humanity as well as the environmental conditions in the world. So my priorities are to work very strongly for nuclear disarmament, and if we have to strengthen our conventional capacity in order to bring down the nuclear weapons, so be it.
And so notice Bob Coates, the defense minister, announced the other day that we're going to send 5,000 troops to Norway to boost our NATO forces. Are these 5,000 new troops? I mean, additional troops?
Well, of course, this is the whole question that the Canadian government has wanted to strengthen our military component. I think that there's an argument to be made for strengthening the armed forces if we look at the role that Canada can play in peacekeeping. There's a number of important leaders in our country who do want Canada to upgrade its role in peacekeeping in the world, and that's going to mean more troops.
Mm-hmm. Do you mind if Pauline Jewett joins us for the next session?
She's one of my great friends.
So, Doug Roche, Canada, I should call you Mr. Ambassador, shouldn't I?
You call me Doug Roche.
That's easier. Pauline Jewett, NDP MP for New Westminster, who is the Foreign Affairs spokesman for her party, will join Doug Roche and myself after the break. Pauline Jewett is MP for New Westminster and very well informed on foreign affairs. Now, what did you make of the ambassador's performance when I asked him my fairly sparse questions on the topic? I'm not an expert on the United Nations or on nuclear freezes.
Well, the Canadian government, by that I mean the Department of External Affairs, has been examining and studying the question of how we should vote on the nuclear freeze for years. And indeed, really looked at it carefully last year when it discovered that Australia, which had hitherto voted against the freeze, was going to abstain. And indeed, Australia did abstain last year and voted for the freeze this year. And so it doesn't come as any surprise. This vote comes up every year. And what it seems to me has taken place is that the Mulroney government has in fact decided on the direction of its foreign policy on these matters, and the direction is going to be to support the United States to vote with the United States, not to break free of the United States, and particularly of the Reagan administration. And that's why it's not this business, with all respect to Doug, that they needed to analyze it more. It's been analyzed to death, the pros and cons of a nuclear freeze. And the real reason, therefore, that Canada voted the way it did is because the Pentagon wanted it to vote that way.
Mr. Roche.
Well, Jack, look, it would be hard to find a parliamentarian in Ottawa who's done more in this field than Pauline Jewett. I really want to pay my respects to her. But I think we have to be careful not to take the rhetoric too far. I would call it an unexamined assumption that the Pentagon dictated this vote. I can tell you that it was decided by the Canadian government before the vote that because of the structural implications for our foreign policy that we would have to have a full review, and that review was not done. And it is not a question of the officials or the bureaucrats in the Secretary of State's office. It is rather a political decision to go right to the cabinet. There'll be a lot of implications if the Canadian government changes its view, and that's why they did not want to take that decision quickly.
No, the Conservatives have always been opposed to a nuclear freeze. Always.
Except for Doug.
Except for Doug and one or two others. It's been their policy. It will continue to be, I suppose, until the United States decides to change its policy. And it seemed to me in the House that the minister was very denigrating of the nations that voted for the freeze. Most of them are friends. And it's very weak arguments when he was saying that it would somehow create tensions in NATO. Look, of the 15 NATO countries, 6 felt that they could act differently.
They weren't the big ones. They weren't the big ones.
Well,
Luxembourg
then again, there again, Doug is denigrating them too. Is he saying that the Netherlands means nothing to Canada and Canadian foreign policy? Is he saying that Denmark, Greece, Spain mean nothing?
On the,
and in ANZUS, for example, in the pact between the United States, Australia, and New Zealand, ANZUS, neither Australia or New Zealand supported the United States. They show more independence of thought and will.
But they're not so economically dependent as we are on the United States.
Oh, they're fairly dependent.
Well, what about Luxembourg, Greece, Denmark?
Look at
not
Jack.
Luxembourg. Luxembourg voted against.
On the question of denigration, I think we should be careful not to denigrate the other factors in arms control and disarmament subjects. The work that Canada has been doing in a very genuine and realistic way on outer space, stopping the militarization of outer space, working for a comprehensive test ban treaty, which would itself be a form of selective freeze, the work that Canada has done in chemical weapons and in verification. Too many people dismiss these items as sort of inconsequential when in fact they are part of the framework that has to be built to put into place a secure system in the world that will not be dependent on escalating nuclear arms. So I think that we have to recognize that Canada is carrying its weight today in the United Nations. There were 72 resolutions. Canada co-sponsored 13. We hear nothing in the media across Canada about the positive work that Canada has done. What we hear about is if Doug Roche is sitting down there in New York all fall at the United Nations waiting to push the no button on the freeze. When I'm telling you that there was a lot of things that went on at the UN this fall in Canada's behalf.
So there.
There's no question there are a lot of things that went on. The fundamental thing for Canadians, for Doug and for all Canadians, is the nuclear freeze. You've got to stop the car before you can put it in reverse. People are continuing to escalate their arms all the time. Negotiations have fallen way behind. You've got to get the freeze first. That's why it's so fundamental.
Jack, too many people will walk away from a freeze if it were ever proclaimed and say the problem will be over.
No, they won't.
I won't be happy at 50,000 level of nuclear arms. I want to have genuine reductions downwards, and that's what Canada has been calling for consistently. It's the unconditional resumption of immediate negotiations between the two superpowers to come down, not to stay where they are.
You freeze first. Every freeze is always, it's stated, followed by massive reductions. It's always stated that way. No one is just going to freeze and do nothing. That's a red herring.
This thing in the ANZUS Pact intrigues me because Australia and New Zealand has been terribly forward on it, hasn't it? Is it New Zealand or Australia that has said no U.S. ships of war will come into our ports? New Zealand.
Yes, the New Zealand government.
Are they part of the ANZUS Pact?
Of course they are. It's the 3 nations.
Are the Americans, you would know, that's taking any economic action against them for their treasonous behavior?
No, indeed they're not. Nor are they likely to have taken any action if Canada had acted more independently. I come back to my earlier point that the Mulroney government is always going to give the Americans the benefit of the doubt, whether it's Grenada, whether it's the nuclear freeze, whatever it is, and I'm really very distressed by this.
I think we should recognize that Prime Minister Brian Mulroney in his first speech as Prime Minister said that however important our bilateral relations with the United States are, and they're plenty important, that we would move on from that into the international arena and play our role multilaterally in the cause of peace and disarmament. That was a higher cause, and Mulroney himself said that as Prime Minister.
But how can you get peace and disarmament when at the same time the Department of Defense is flogging the Pentagon and its defense contracts in Canada?
Hey,
in 13 cities of Canada. And we asked the Minister of Employment and Immigration about that yesterday, and she said it would create jobs. That's why we're doing it. We're going to have more and more arms for more jobs. And we said to her, did she not know that a job in the arms industry costs $60,000 per person year, which is twice at least more than a job created, say, in housing?
Well, am I doing a disservice to British Columbia when next week I have Bob Wenman and maybe some of these arms contractors on the air here saying, Canadian firms, bid for these weapons of destruction or these parts of them. We need the jobs desperately, and I'll bet you there isn't a union in the country that would complain about it right now.
There are many unions that know the facts that I have just given, that consumer good production is more intensive job creating.
I think we should be careful not to talk about this in terms of weapons of destruction. What you're talking about and these people coming across Canada offering contracts in Canadian businesses are transportation, electronics, communications equipment, all the various things that Canada is very strong in.
And we'll grab them.
Certainly we will.
But they're all also connected with developing components of the MX missile and the cruise missile and so on.
Pauline, right now, if somebody comes into this town and goes to one of these Richmond industries out in Richmond and says, here's a $50 million contract, we'll grab it, and the pickets won't last 2 minutes, will they?
If the Mulroney government was interested in jobs, it would get more jobs out of consumer goods development, out of the housing sector, out of the construction industry, than it will ever get out of joining the arms race.
Mr. Ambassador, what are you doing in town?
I'm here speaking for the United Nations Association in Canada. I've been on a speaking tour of Western Canada, helping Canadians to understand the full work that the United Nations is doing, and particularly the UNA in Canada, which is an information and educational association that helps Canadians to understand the full work and value of the UN today.
You got a speech tonight?
I'm speaking tonight.
Tonight. Okie dokie.
I better go.
Yes, you better go too.
Well, I'm a great believer in the UN, you can be sure of that.
Well,
I'm a great believer in Pauline Jewett.
I got to tell you, Helen Caldicott converted me last week, the week before last. And for the benefit of viewers, that entire program will be replayed on December 26th, Boxing Day. A good day to watch it, 90 minutes. Never had such a response to a program in many years.
Oh, she's tremendous.
Yeah, she's a wee bit extravagant, but she's magnificent. My thanks to Pauline Jewett, NDP MP for New Westminster, and to Canada's ambassador to Disarmament. And we can so too talk socially. If I did drink, I would take one. If not, you can buy me a cup of coffee.
That'll be my pleasure, Jack.
And tell Joe I was asking for him.
Thank you.
And I'll be back with the battling twins after the break. It really is a fascinating situation for any observers, with the invalidation of Bruce Yorke's election to the 10th spot in City Council because of the 220 affidavit votes not being formally sworn. This man, Philip Owen, in number 11 spot, he took the action, and these two men are now going to have a mini Vancouver municipal election. Has a date yet been set for it?
No, it hasn't been set yet.
Now, are you upset by this, or do you accept the democratic process and the judgment of Madam Justice Proudfoot that the affidavits were not properly sworn, and that was that, they had to come out?
The objective facts are that approximately 6,300 people who were eligible to vote swore an affidavit to vote, and through no fault of their own have been disenfranchised. That is the objective facts, and that, in my opinion, is a fundamental democratic violation of the right of people to vote. And that is the fundamental issue that's at stake here.
The judge was wrong.
Yes, the judge was wrong.
What do you mean
in law?
disenfranchised?
In law.
I don't understand
Let me, wrong in law.
What-
You're
what is-
perfectly entitled to say so.
Yes,
if you
I
believe
certainly
so.
am.
But you said 6,300.
6,300, yes.
But all 6,300 votes of the affidavits were not thrown out.
They have been, because there's been a new election called.
That's
She's
the-
ordered a new election.
That's
do you
not-
understand
that's
that?
not
Do you
true.
understand that? It certainly
You
is
can't
true.
relate- you can't relate the
Those
6,300 to what you're saying.
people have all been disenfranchised.
No, they have not.
They certainly have.
No, a lot of
Their
people...
votes have not
well,
been counted.
You obviously weren't in court, and you weren't listening to
I
what the
was
judge
in
said.
court.
You didn't listen to your
I
lawyer or to
listened-
my lawyer.
I listened to what
That's
was
all.
being said, and the fundamental question is a matter of democracy.
All right,
here.
let me-
And for the NPA or any representative of the NPA to pose as a champion of democracy is to turn black into white.
just a
This
minute.
is the organization
Undermining
that only,
democracy.
that
What are you
doesn't
talking
even
about?
allow nominations from their own floor. This is the organization that has fought against the ward system, despite the fact that people have twice voted for it. This is the organization that is trying to restrict the franchise by every conceivable manner and means and so on. So for them to talk about democracy, you know, is really to
Order,
order.
please.
Yes,
I am
sorry.
sitting here as a fairly rational human being, and my understanding of the judgment and the actions is totally different from yours. My understanding is that because of the fact that there was only a $220 vote variation, that the position has been taken legally with success, that the affidavits were not properly sworn, and as such were ineligible to be counted.
Yes.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Well,
That's
if I
what
can,
the
if I can
judge
say a
said.
word,
Just a minute.
just a moment. Bruce Yorke is very upset, and I can understand that he's upset. So he should be, because he had a seat on council for a short while, and now he doesn't. And we have to go back to the electorate. But there's a whole confusion of facts here, and I think we should kind of pare it down and talk about the issue. 6,300 people that used affidavits weren't all disenfranchised at all. We know that in a lot of polling stations, a proper affidavit was sworn, and the proper procedure was followed. So to say that all 6,300 people are disenfranchised is not correct and not an accurate statement at all. Now, my lawyer, I had a very good lawyer named David Fredrickson, who went to work and discovered that there's a point of pure law here. Now, the thing you must remember, that Bruce Yorke's lawyer agreed with my lawyer on the facts that there was more than 220 irregularities. That was established in court. There was no discussion about fact. Facts were established. The discussion was on the pure law about the swearing of an affidavit, and that's what Madam Justice Proudfoot ruled on, and she ruled in favor of our application.
That's as I understand it, Bruce.
That
with
is
the best
true.
will in
All
the
right,
world.
you understand. That is true in a technical sense. In a technical sense, that is true. But what I am saying is, objectively, the result of that decision is that 6,300 people who were eligible to vote signed a solemn declaration that they were eligible to vote, put their name to it, witnessed by a district returning officer who asked them to read, in which it says, "I swear on it," or "I make oath on it," that they, because of that circumstance, which is no fault of their own, we are going to be subjected to or possibly subjected to a very expensive
Okay, I've got that. What do you mean
recount.
possibly subjected? Are you going to appeal
Because
this
there
decision?
is the possibility of, we haven't ruled that out.
You may appeal, Madam
That's
Justice
possible.
Proudfoot.
That's possible.
All right, now let
That's
me put
possible.
something to you.
We haven't.
Can I
you
say one thing
understand
about
that's
this?
Only possible.
There's two
That's
words
only
you must think about, remember, that came out in court. One, qualified to vote. And the 6,300 people went to the polls and established in their minds that they were qualified. But one, you're qualified, and two, you have to be entitled to vote. You're either on the voters list or you go through a procedure with a sworn affidavit, and then you're entitled to vote. There's two words to remember.
I was going to ask you, even though you're not a lawyer, you were certainly in a position to challenge every election in the city of Vancouver where the majority was less than a clear 6,000 votes. Well, you're not.
Yeah.
Baker, I think, is going to launch on behalf of Pam Glass and Brian Calder an action, perhaps a date on Wednesday, to say that all the affidavit votes are invalid because there was no proper form prescribed in the Act, and because they didn't make themselves properly sworn as qualified and entitled to vote. Now, if that happens, and the interesting thing, in case I put it to you,
Yes, all right.
is that our friend Baker, acting these two, is only going after specified people. He's going after Libby Davis and Marguerite Ford. He's not going after Campbell, of course.
Well, I don't know what their case is.
Let me
but-
put this question in its simplicity. We don't want to widen this thing in any way, shape, or form. We want the common sense to prevail, the higher concept of democracy. That is to say, the right to vote.
Can we talk about democracy for a minute?
That is the political issue
Let's-
that's involved.
Okay.
And Mr. Owen is placing a technical consideration above the will of the majority and $250,000 expense to the
Mr. Owen.
citizens.
The law is the law, and for him talking about this fine line doesn't make any difference.
You're the one that's talking about a very fine line.
You have
You're
two
the one
lawyers,
that's doing
and
that.
you have a judge and or a jury in our system to go and make these decisions about these fine lines. And it was a clear line drawn by Madam Justice Proudfoot.
No doubt in my
No
mind.
doubt about that. She made it very clear. Now, he's talking about wishy-washy,
I'm
the
just
law is
saying
this, but we'll do that. Now, my point is this.
Possibilities,
Just a
that's
minute.
all.
My point on the whole thing is this, that in our democratic system, there's one citizen and one vote. And we have a system here where you can have one citizen, and if someone wants to, they can go all over the city and vote wherever they want, live in one end of the city, vote in another, give a name and an address, produce no identification, and get a ballot paper, and the ballot's separated from the affidavit. And that's an absolute outrage.
I've covered many.
Let me
put it
That's the basic system.
What that is a slander against the citizens of Vancouver. That's exactly what that is.
But at the
and
same
the
time-
voters
It's not
of
at all.
Vancouver are certainly going to reply to that kind of an implication.
Well,
And,
Are you
you know,
saying,
I am-
please,
no,
are
just a
you
minute.
saying that there were false votes
I
cast
didn't say
by-
that. I said that that's
That's
a
what he says,
possibility.
isn't it?
Yeah, he says that, and he's getting himself
It
all
is a
worked up.
possibility.
It is a possibility because I know of people that went to one polling station and a husband and wife, as an example, I'll give you one example, and I'm not going to mention their names, but they went into McBride School. The husband was on the voters list because that's where their house is, and he's on that voters list. His wife was standing there, and one of the poll clerks said, "Well, Mayor, aren't you going to vote here?" And she said, "No, I have to go over to Livingston School because we have a revenue house, and I'm on the voters list over there." "Oh, well, just sign one of these and you can vote here." She said, "Well, I'm on the voters list over there." "No, we'll just sign one of these and you can vote here. You don't have to go all the way over there." Now, this is the kind of opportunity that's available, and when people realize that's an opportunity, we could turn honest people into dishonest people,
But I
and
want to
we're
say something to
attacking the
Bruce.
foundation of democracy.
There is no doubt in my mind that this election was badly run, that the affidavits were improperly handled, and if you're going to swear an affidavit, you can't swear it by signing your name. You've got to, I, John Webster, do swear that I live at 1404 whatever, and that I am qualified and entitled to vote, and that ballot should be checked against
all right.
something before my ballot is
Look,
cast.
All right, now, if you'll give me the time, I'll answer that question properly. Yes, that would be a
The right
preferred
way to do it.
preferred way to do. Now, let me be very precise. All those people who came in for 6,300 were asked were they qualified. They were asked for identification. They were not given a vote unless they give
a lot of people
identification. Just a second, let me please finish.
You don't know the law.
Well, you can't make that statement. It's not correct.
I'm saying that that's what happened.
It's not true.
Thirdly, they were then asked to read what was said in it, including the words "I swear" or "I make oath," and sign. Now, frankly
Not enough.
speaking,
Well, that's not true.
All right. Now, let me just. That is a very rigorous process compared, say, for instance, to what happens in the rest of the municipalities where you don't have to take any kind of an oral declaration whatsoever, and that's in the Municipal Act, and it was the
I have
provincial
voted
government
by
that set this thing.
affidavit with a Bible in my hand. I
In the
am
municipal
sure,
act,
and
in
not,
election?
no, in
No.
a provincial election,
All
I
right,
think, and
okay.
it's then put in a special box,
I'm saying-
and it's checked against the voters list afterwards, and then and
That's
only
what
then-
was done up
All
till
of these
1982.
technicalities, Jack,
No,
don't
not.
go to the heart of the matter. That is to say,
No.
the fundamental right to vote if you are eligible, and that is what
Qualified and
being
eligible.
Qualified.
eligible.
You're
Eligible,
sour
in my
grapes,
opinion.
Bruce.
Not
Well,
sour grapes
you're
for me.
just not-
All the sour
you're not
grapes is
facing the
coming
issue.
from here.
No, it's not.
had won
And
that-
the citizens, if I had lost by that, I certainly wouldn't have gone to this kind of nonsense, which is a denial of democracy, Jack.
If I may say in a small, soft voice, there is still a possibility, if the court action is taken by Jonathan Baker on behalf of two NPA losers, Calder and Glass, that it will not be a one-on-one by-election. It will be a 3 or 4 by-election on each side. If all the affidavit ballots, which are ruled invalid, and they have not yet been so done, the Parks Board elections are wiped out, School Board elections are wiped out, and half of the aldermanic elections are wiped out, and I would not be in the least bit surprised if the elections were recalled, except for the mayoralty election, because Harcourt won by way over the number of affidavit ballots of 6,300. Gentlemen, I think that's well put. I think maybe we should leave it at that. There's been far too much shouting on this program. You're upsetting me terribly. You're sour grapes.
I'm not sour grapes, so sour grapes is all over here, Jack.
I'm just
all
on
over
the side of
here.
the law.
You know,
Our country is run by the law, and that's
Okay.
what
and I'm on the side
The
of
law.
democracy.
Simple.
Democracy.
You're not on the side. You can't
democracy.
make that statement.
I'm making
Democracy.
that statement. And the
Democracy.
NPA,
Coming from you is a laugh. That's the best joke I've heard for a long time.
The NPA
Ah.
is the most
Democracy.
is the most
Coming from you, Bruce, that is a real
absurd.
joke. That is very funny.
My
Why don't you be
democracy
serious? Why don't you be serious?
has been proven. Yours is the one, and the NPA's is the one who has taken every anti-democrat.
I didn't realize you were such a clown. I really didn't.
Known.
I didn't realize you were such a clown.
I didn't realize that you were
This is not a comedy show. We're supposed to be serious. We're with a very serious, intelligent man here.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the capitalist and the Cope candidate.
Yes,
See, I didn't read me.
Very nice.
The
Very nice,
capitalist
Jack,
and the Cope candidate.
No, you can't
but
say
Jack,
that.
seriously, you know, it's not a laughing matter. It really isn't a laughing matter because, look, $250,000 is what is going to be the a result
What is
of this sort
democracy
of a
worth?
thing
Is
if
it not worth
happens.
$250,000?
Yes.
What's democracy
Well,
worth? Can you put a number on democracy?
Yes. Look,
I mean, what
on the question of democracy.
do I hear 300,000? How can I get it for
just a
100,000?
second,
How about
just a
50?
second.
5,000 down, the balance money catch
As
me?
I said,
what are you talking
the
about?
fundamental question
Just
here is the
ridiculous.
right to vote, which has been
That's right,
denied.
and we want one
Okay.
citizen, one
Denied.
vote.
Been
Order,
denied.
And you like one
Denied.
citizen and all sorts of votes.
I will
And
I will
you want
not
democracy.
I will not
Denied.
tolerate two people talking at the same time from this moment on.
I'm talking to you.
What are the principal issues on which you are going to fight? We'll presume there's many one-on-one by-election, although a myriad candidates may file and join you for their own democratic interests. What to you, in 25 words or less, is the principal issue on which you will fight to make sure Yorke stays out?
I haven't got the nomination. I don't know. I might not get the nomination from NPA. He might not get the nomination from Cope. Maybe
Don't
two
give-
different people.
Let's not have
No,
garbage.
that's true.
I'll buy you a
You're talking
Christmas
about
present.
people who are joking, making fools of themselves. Yes, this is
What's
the prime
what's-
example right here, eh, Jack?
what
Eh?
Christmas present?
Really?
What is the principal issue?
Well, the main issue is the one that we've just talked about. Obviously, Alderman Yorke disagrees with this. He thinks that we should have an open system where one citizen can go all over the city with no identification and vote as often as they like. I think that's kind of an interesting issue.
Absurd. Absolutely.
This affidavit
absurd.
voting system is
Talk
absolutely
about
absurd. It's
making
an
a
outrage.
joke of things.
Well, it's
Who's
true.
making a fool of
It's
himself
true.
now?
Be
Absolutely
quiet.
true.
Yes, well,
Be quiet.
An utter fool and complete completely utter fool.
You're not listening to the host now. He's telling us what to do.
Completely
Behave
utter
yourself.
fool of himself.
I can understand why you're so upset. But
I'm
just
not
try and
upset.
calm
You're the
down.
one. You're
Try
the
and
one
calm
that has
down.
made an utter fool of yourself. Why should I be upset? I'm delighted that you have shown what a fool you are.
Do I get 10 minutes to talk now? Or you're going to go to the phone lines? Okay.
Go ahead, please.
Is that you, Jack?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a disgrace. I feel that I worked on the polls, and by jingo, you better believe it, everything was done to oil. And there might have been 1 in a million. And this Mr. Owen is a fool, because we're going to have to pay taxes for this. And I really am annoyed.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack. There's one thing I would like to ask them. Why the hell, when they're in office, any of them, or if they're so concerned, don't they do something about making sure that the polling lists are proper? My husband and I have been on the list for years and voted. This time only my husband was on. Now why? I phoned up the mayor's office. They gave me a number.
Question.
Others, 4 others, 5 altogether. And I got it's all true. And he checked everything, and I signed it. And that was it.
Okay.
Well, just one comment. I think affidavit voting is fine, but I think you should go to your polling station where you live and produce some identification. And obviously you have to properly swear an affidavit.
That was done.
No, it wasn't done.
And that was done, Jack. That was done.
Probably in most cases.
And I can't prove it,
Nobody
so
can.
to speak.
But you've
Nobody
got
can,
to
so
accept the judgment of the judge who said that the affidavit voting is simply in enough cases to put the question of the election in doubt.
You understand, Jack, it's the wider principle that's involved here.
It was the form.
Intention of the legislature, and it's a question of what is supreme, substance or form.
Well, now just a minute.
Yes.
Well, what do you do about it? What do you do about a chap who walks in
Yes.
and I've got the facts on this, and a chap walks into 650 Richard Street, and he doesn't feel like going out to the Dunbar. He lives at 3700 block West 19th. And they say, well, just sign this and you can vote here. He's on the voters list out there, but he just votes downtown because he happened to be. They didn't feel like going out to his polling station. That is terrible.
Right, but
and that happened all the time.
Okay, go ahead, please.
That pales into insignificance compared to the real
I must
fundamental.
disagree with you on
Well,
that.
you may disagree, but the voters will determine that in a very decisive way.
The voters
I have no doubts whatsoever.
You
of
say
that.
the voters are going to return you because the judge has ruled the election invalid.
No.
Is that what you're
I'm
saying?
saying that the voters are going to return myself because of the fact that justice has not been done and that disenfranchisement has taken place, and he is putting the citizens of Vancouver to an unnecessary cost.
That's not fair in either case.
I don't care whether it's fair or not, but the citizens of Vancouver are going to care, and they are the ones that are going to determine the situation.
I put it to you, if you had been 220 votes behind, you'd have challenged at least for a recount.
I would not have.
If he had known that there was a flaw in the system.
I would not have.
There's a flaw in the system all over the province.
Quiet, please. Go ahead, please.
Hello. First of all, I'd like to say that I think it's shameful that these two men are sitting here casting insults at each other when there's supposed to be some sort of discussion going on. Secondly, I'm not an NPA supporter, but I do disagree with Bruce Yorke. There are protections in the system. They've been taken to court. I disagree that people have been disenfranchised because in any event, whatever happens, these people will still have their franchise. And in the long run, I think it's stupid that it's going to cost us a lot of money. And as a taxpayer, I object to that. But I still don't think that anybody's been disenfranchised, and I think that Bruce Yorke is wrong.
Thank you. And as a matter of fact, one can say without fear or favor that this was a sloppily run election on the question of the affidavits. After the break.
That's correct.
In case you didn't know, this is Bruce Yorke, who's just been thrown out from his elected seat in the council by a decision of the Supreme Court. And this is Philip Owen, the man who caused it. He says that he's a cad, a bounder, and destroying the process. He says he's upholding the democratic free right to have things properly done. And this caller says, go ahead, please.
I have a confession to make. I voted illegally in the last election twice. I live in Burnaby.
And?
It was quite easy. I stole my grandmother's card because she was too old to get out of the house and vote. I showed my driver's license. I signed a piece of paper, and I voted twice at the same polling station.
You're talking about the provincial election?
Yes.
Well, don't ever do it
There's
again.
the civic election. Don't put words in my mouth.
Or the Burnaby civic election.
That's right.
Well, I'm not going to ask you who you vote for, but you should be
I've
bleeding.
just changed my vote. Where can I campaign for Mr. Owen?
Well, you're not entitled to vote in Vancouver. We don't want you doing it again. A couple of cheating votes are enough. Go away, you dreadful
Very
woman.
interesting. Here's a person who admits that she's cheating, and she wants to vote for Mr. Owen.
Because I'm going to correct the system, so I don't want two votes of one person.
That's only because you dislike kids.
I don't want two votes of one person. I only want one vote per citizen.
That really reduces it to its gut level, boy.
I rest my case. I proved my case right there.
Go ahead, please.
You may think you did, but the citizens won't.
Go ahead,
believe
please.
me.
Yes. Something I don't understand about Mr. Owen's approach to this. There are some safeguards built into it already. First of all, if I'm on the voters list and I go and vote there, and then go and swear in and vote into several other stations, in any sort of judicial recount, that's going to be caught. If, on the other hand, I'm not on the list and go in and swear in at a number of stations, then that will also be caught, because you in fact are signing that you sign that sheet when you make your oath, and
the
that can be caught
affidavits
in a judicial recount.
on a recount.
What I don't understand about Mr. Owen's challenge is what.
I'm just telling you, sir, on a recount, only the ballots are counted. The qualifications and entitlement are not checked.
And they took those affidavits and put them in the mayor's ballot boxes, so you have to go through a whole separate application to court to get those
Is that
mayor
Mr.
ballot
Owen
boxes.
has to believe that over 250 people in this city voted when they weren't entitled to. He has to believe that there are people coming in from Richmond.
No,
or
I
people
don't.
voting
I didn't
twice,
say
or,
that. No, I didn't say that at all. You must understand. You're not hearing that. The Madam Justice Proudfoot ruled invalid 220 affidavits that weren't properly sworn. A sworn affidavit is a very sacred thing in our judicial system, and that's the law. It wasn't me that created the problem. It wasn't me that caused it at all. I had a judgment on pure law, and she ruled that the application I made was correct. So if you want to argue with the law, then go ahead.
Where the confusion arises, he says that they're both right. For the purposes of this decision, the figure was taken to 220. But that could conceivably be applied to all 60.
Let's be clear, Jack. I want to say something. I want to say something that that may have a bearing on this. I heard the argumentations that were made in court to Justice Proudfoot, and on the basis of the way it was argued, and I'm not faulting anybody or anything else, she had no alternative to do that. I believe that. But what I am saying is, and I'm not challenging that in that sense, what I am saying is that there is a higher principle involved in
than
here.
law.
Yes, and that is democracy.
Substance.
Substance. That's what I'm saying.
In other words, if somebody
really,
had come along and proved that, say, even 105 people had actually falsified affidavits, then you wouldn't be screaming and shouting.
Of course.
Right.
Of
Okay,
course,
we've got that. We've got that.
Of course.
Don't develop it. We've got it. Go ahead, please.
Yes. When I voted, I went to the polling station. I was asked to produce ID, which I did. I wasn't asked to swear, so I didn't do that. But also, I've recently been married. I have identification in 2 names. I'm on the voters list under one name at one spot. I voted at a different polling station under under my single maiden name. And as far as I'm concerned, the opportunity is there for, it's human nature. People, if the opportunity is there to cheat, people will cheat. And I didn't, but it certainly is easy enough to do.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Could I just comment? I would say this. I have confidence in the vast majority of people that they are honest.
So do I.
That is my fundamental conception. But no, you are really calling that into question, Philip.
No, not at all.
Due deference, that's really what you are doing.
I know that a lot of polling stations were run according to the rules. Identification was asked for, was shown, a proper oath was sworn. A lot of those 6,300 were entitled to vote. qualified to vote, did vote, and the votes were counted, and the votes stand. But I'm saying there is a minor flaw here that could create a real problem.
Go ahead from Nanaimo, of all places.
Yes, I'm sitting back in Nanaimo here, and I just had a couple of statements I wanted to make. One is that in Nanaimo here, we don't have to go through such a vigorous swearing-in ceremony as Mr. Yorke has said. Number two, it seems that sitting here that Mr. Owen believes that every vote that was done wrongly was in Mr. Yorke's favor, which could be totally wrong too.
No, I never said that. I never made that accusation.
He wanted to have a statement in democracy. I think he should have gone to the courts and said and made sure that this never happened again, not go through all this expensive process.
Fair enough. Fair
That's
enough.
exactly what I'm doing, getting the law changed.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes?
I feel that it's in the best interest for the whole city that the restraint we're under right now, that maybe Mr. Owen should just withdraw his complaint and resign and save the taxpayers a lot of money.
Thank you.
He doesn't have to resign. He hasn't got any position to resign.
You had to resign.
No, I didn't have to resign. I've been
Thrown out.
denied
You've been
by.
told to
No,
resign.
I've been put in a state of temporary suspension. You know, the final result, I have no doubt whatsoever about it, and I'm putting it to the people of Vancouver, you know, that this is you know, an unwarranted expense.
Let me ask you both a serious question. Is this going to be a full-scale campaign?
Well, it's not you know, completely determined that there will be a campaign yet. We are still considering
appeal.
Only an appeal on law, not on the judge's.
I understand.
You understand?
But if it goes to an election, which I'm sure it will.
Going to, yes, of course, we will be into it up to our neck, because fundamentally, of course, what is involved here is
the control of the city of Vancouver.
And let me put something to you in that regard too. That was decided really by the electors already. They're only going to reaffirm it, and so
don't give me that.
Yes, I am.
Nobody likes the rigors of an election. It's not a lot of fun. I've got better things to do with my time, and so does Alderman Yorke. But we've got to get back to the fundamental principle. One citizen, one vote, tighten the system so that is chiseled in
They both
granite.
missed the point, but let me make it quite clear so you're not confused by Yorke or Owen. This is a deadly serious election. It's 5-5 without Yorke. That's 5 of the Harcourt Cope coalition with certain policy directions, and 5 NPAs. Yorke's seat gave the Harcourt Cope coalition of the left the majority, the power in council. If Owen gets elected, Harcourt loses his clout for the Harcourt Cope coalition, and the NPA will run council. Is that correct?
If all of those things that you say, yes. And I'm saying that the citizens of Vancouver have already said they want the opposite, and they will reaffirm that.
They have
say that.
I have said that.
In the face of the judge's
and
decision.
politically, I'm saying that. The judge's decision is not germane to that. What is germane is what the citizens have already done themselves.
So we should have just
and they will reaffirm that in spades. I am absolutely confident.
We should just carry on and not let this flaw in the system exist and do nothing about it. I came forward because I believe in democracy, and it's got to be preserved, and it's sacred.
No, you came forward because you wanted to try to get a seat on council. It had nothing to do with it.
Well,
if you'd
everybody
done
who
this,
runs wants
why
a seat
hadn't
on
you
council.
done this before?
Everybody-
It's a fact that the decision to go for this was done by the unanimous vote of council, and it was done by the social credit government of which you are a supporter.
It wasn't a unanimous
Why didn't you
vote
do
of
something
council.
to that?
It wasn't unanimous vote of council.
Was
You
it
should read the
unanimous?
minutes. I've got the minutes.
I have the
It was
minutes
moved by
too.
Alderman Rankin
But I gotta
and
make-
voted opposed by the NPA.
It was
After
not.
the break, take it away.
Not. It was
Excuse me. Just to put a word of sanity into this again, get it clear in your minds. Alderman Yorke has been removed from council by a decision of the court on an application by Philip Owen, who was the one behind him. Other complications being avoided, it will be a one-on-one election. Neither is to blame for it. It's a perfectly proper procedure. It will cost a couple of $100,000. And you can like that, or you can lump it, because it's going to happen one way or another, unless there's an appeal against Madam Justice Proudfoot, which is upheld by a superior court, which is unlikely, I should imagine. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Webster.
Yes, sir.
Good morning.
Morning.
I wish to ask you, first of all, during the break, did you just put them both on your knee and spank them?
I did, as a matter of fact, yes.
Glad you did, because they both deserve it. And another thing, I'm glad you got them on your show this morning, because I really wouldn't vote for either one of them.
Thank you, sir. You're a man of considerable cogency and
Well,
judgment.
he should run. Let him run. Let him run. Yes, yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Jack, I just want to say something, that in 1982, they had 4,000 affidavits. The ballots were put into an envelope and checked, as you were saying earlier in your program, after the election. Out of the 4,000 affidavits, I want to stress that 1,700 were rejected.
Let me speak to that
This
first.
time around, they're accepting all 6,300. Now, I'll leave that up to you.
Wonderful point, ma'am.
All right, but it's on the surface, it means one thing, but it's false, in fact, because of the following difference. In 1982, the law was different than what it is in 1984. And let me finish, please. And in 1982, one had to be on a previous voters list in order to be to vote.
To be on the voters list.
To be on a previous voters list. And the votes were all separated out, which they aren't this time, and they were able to look at each one.
Good.
And every one of those who was not on a previous voters list were rejected, not for any other reason. So it's apples and orange situation.
To some
Jack.
extent
completely.
it is.
No, completely, Jack.
Okay, I'll accept
completely,
that.
completely.
I'll accept that.
Completely.
Anything to avoid trouble. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Owens, you're supposed to be an honest man. I was just wondering, if you had won the election by 220 votes and knew about all these irregularities, would you have gone to court and asked them to throw it out?
I would have had the law changed. I'm more interested in changing the law than getting on city council. It's no big, thankful job to get on city council.
Come
I want to tell you.
Philip Owen.
And it was only revealed. It was only revealed after the election because people who called me. I didn't discover this problem unless the citizens told me about it. I got all kinds of phone calls and suddenly realized there was a flaw. So we had to take it forward and correct it.
I do not accept your statement that you are more interested in changing the law than in winning an election on the basis of this disallowed election.
If Alderman Yorke had lost by 200 and he had got 80, 90 phone calls, he would have done something about it.
Of course he would.
I did not say that. I said I would accept the official returns. That's what I would do. And everything in my history proves that that is the case. I don't lie.
I am looking at
I don't lie, do I?
I'm not telling you you're
do
a liar.
I, liar? No. All right.
I'm
saying that was the case.
I don't know of any occasion. To the best of my knowledge and information, I don't know of any time you have lied as far as I can recall.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you. Very good. Very good. I appreciate that.
But don't tell me you're holier than thou on practical matters.
I'm saying that 220 votes on an official recount would satisfy me. I am not interested.
Okay, official recount.
Yes, that's what we had. That's what we had. An official recount.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, Mr. Webster.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have 2 points. The first one is listening to this reminds me, and I wonder if it does you, of that very famous Monty Python skit about let's have an argument. And both these men, I think, should learn from that arguing is not the simple gainsaying of what the other has said. And if you remember that piece as well by Monty Python, you recall that after they had the argument, a couple of them went down the hall and took hitting on the head lessons, and it seems to be both Mr. Yorke and Mr. Owen should do the same thing. So that's the second point I'd like to make. More seriously, is when you have an election, any election like this, the election statute is very complex, and people who are involved in elections and in recounts know that there are going to be any number of technicalities. The issue is, I think, probably before Madam Justice Proudfoot, and I think should be before the public, is at what point is it reasonable to call this process into being and to have a recount? Mr. Owen has argued publicly and before Madam Justice Proudfoot that 280 votes or so is a fair criteria. Madam Justice Proudfoot obviously accepted in law that was close enough. I guess the point that Mr. Yorke is making is that will the public think that that was a fair use of discretion or not? And I think that's a fair way to let the public decide. Frankly, I agree with the gentleman before who said that if these are the two choices you have to vote for, you obviously have to vote for what their party stands for, not for them.
Thank you very much, sir. Hitting on the head lessons after the program in the green room. Go ahead, please.
I'd just like to ask Bruce Yorke one question. How can a man that's an avowed communist use the word democracy so loosely?
I'm not using the word democracy, and democracy is a thing that I fervently believe in, have practiced all my life, and I can prove it 1,000 times. Mr. Webster can back me up on that I am probably the most democratic person that one of the most democratic.
I have known you for many years, but I do not now, nor will I ever offer myself as a reference for your political career. Let me make that
I didn't say that. I said,
you damn nearly did.
No, I said.
Nor will I take
Am I a democratic person, Jack?
As far as I know.
Thank you.
Same goes for Philip Owen.
All right, I'm not calling that into question. And incidentally, it's not a matter between Mr. Owen and myself. That's not the issue. That isn't the issue. You've already said that yourself.
I've said that myself.
Yes, of course. And it's not a matter of, bashing heads and that sort of thing.
There have been many Webster argy-bargies. This has been the loudest, one of the loudest argy-bargy that has ever, might win an Oscar, but it won't win any award for cogent, sane debating. My thanks to you and the best of luck. Seconds out, may the best man win. I'll be back after the break. Monday morning, I have the Deputy Director of UNICEF, United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, who's just back from Ethiopia. I've also got a delightful visitor from England, Canon Brownrigg of Petersham. That's the churchyard in which none other than Commander Vancouver is buried. And I'll have myself and Steve and Annie and Mark at 9 a.m. precisely. Oh, of course, you're kind of regarded as an Edith, what's her name? Piaf. Piaf.
72, that's marvellous.
What do you mean it's not that marvellous? I'm getting close to myself.
I want to thank you for it.
I was not the father of the child.
He denied it.
The wife was
I won't
already...
put that blame on you.
Okay.
So Pontlot in Vancouver.
Wonderful. None of us will now ever forget Pontlot.
Oh, Uncle Bert.
Sweetest little fellow, Uncle Bert and all
Uncle
the Rosies.
Bert,
Yeah,
yes. And what was the name of the chemist on the
Evans
square?
the chemist.
That Evans the chemist. And
Oh, no, I've only known I've been pregnant for 2 months.
What do you mean you've only... You're joking.
I'm serious.
You mean you didn't notice it?
I didn't know. I was so busy.
Let's take some calls and we'll explore that little piece of intimate detail after the break. Don't miss the Barney on Webster on Check. No, that's no good.
One more time.
Watch the Barney between Owen and Yorke on Check at midnight.